Good evening. Good evening and welcome. Thank you all so very much for being here tonight. I feel this is a really wonderful and special occasion. We had an amazing weekend here of a conference called Black in Design, and to have that be followed now on the Tuesday night, the first night of the lectures of this week with Richard Tuttle is actually an incredible thing for the school. It's a great opportunity. So I'm very happy that you are here with us, and I'm of course very delighted that Richard Tuttle is with us. I want to also take this moment to thank Craig Robbins, my friend, for helping us be introduced to Richard and use his friendship to try and entice Richard to come and join us here tonight. So thank you also to Craig. Craig will be joining me later on to open up also a conversation with Richard, which I think will be extremely exciting. So I'm looking forward to it, and I hope that you will also really engage and participate and ask lots of questions, because I think there's a lot of wonderful work. I'll be very brief. I think that that the work of Richard Tuttle is actually something very unique and something very unusual. Unlike many other artists, many other sculptors, he's really dealing with often very small scale of things. He is a maker of things, in the sense that a lot of people who work in this building understand what I mean by he's a maker of things. And he is someone who draws and believes very strongly in drawing, and so he's also very much the drawer of things, the person who draws out of things, really their kind of contents, things that would often not be expected. And he does that with material that is also not the normal material often of artistic practice, in the sense that the question of the value of things is something that's very important to him. He uses a lot of the time probably material that doesn't have significant value, but he constructs value from the way in which he handles that material and what he makes of the material. I think Richard also experienced working in the context of a gallery at the beginning of his career, and that's also something that's very evident in terms of the way in which his work relates to space. He's very careful about the way that the positioning of the work, the locating of the work, becomes part and parcel of our participation in that work. So it's not really the making of objects on a pedestal that are viewed in terms of the singularity of their own qualities, but also I think in many works, the positioning of the work in terms of its specific location, high, low, where it is, becomes part of the way in which the work is actually framed. In the context of the GSD also, we're very fortunate, because I think in at least in a significant way, Richard is going to touch not only on the question of his art, which we will see, but also the way that he is thinking through issues related to design. So I think we're very lucky and fortunate that he will speak to us also about design. This is something that we are always thinking about and struggling what it is, what are the parameters, what are the conditions, what are the situations. So I think it's a very interesting and an exciting situation to have an artist who is coming to the school to really talk about design. So without any further delay, I'd like you to welcome Richard Tuttle. Thank you.
Hi. I guess we should be over here. Thank you for that introduction, and we were just in our dean's office, and it became clear that Craig Robbins, who is a kind of figure behind this event, and I are unusual in that we each can, we have a response to art and we have a response to design. I think that's actually fairly rare, but it's very good. And in fact, to understand the complementarity or how the complementarity exists. So, in terms of not making a mistake between the two, or how using the one in the right place and using the other in the right place is the case. So even though I have a very formal talk, I'm going to begin sort of informally telling this story where I flew into the airport here this summer from Maine, and I was sort of half asleep, and I had this idea about what design means to me, and I saw in my head something like an egg poacher, but it was ceramic, and I saw that each egg took its own shape that had nothing to do with who cracked it in or the size, and each egg would take a kind of independent shape. And I thought, that's an interesting idea of design. And so the rest of the summer, I just spent buying egg poachers, and wondering if I should get ceramics and make them myself and so on. And finally, I did find this egg poacher, and I cooked an egg in it. And I saw that it wasn't the edge of the egg that interested me. It was actually the space between that edge of the egg and the poacher. And being lazy, I quickly accepted the word that was infinity. I mean, that's a kind of infinity. And I think that's the basis of this talk, where it commences, where I'm really thinking that the design in terms of that infinity, and then it actually turns around and becomes something quite the opposite. This is the foreword. A handful of dust released into the wind. I've always thought the oneness of looking at human beings more important. At best, coming to the GSD with my thoughts about design is cheeky and arrogant, and at worst, a serious misreading of oneself. Indeed, the invitation was accepted as an opportunity toward goals, probably not apparent, superficially, an effort to raise the respect for art and artists, a chance to learn a subject in greater focus, to pursue my theory about the unity of language and selfhood coming from my exhibition in London 1 year ago, etc. It does seem one accepts to speak on things one knows nothing about more readily than on what one really knows something about. If conversation is about ideas and text about words, a talk must be in the middle. Ideas can get in the way of words, and words in the way of ideas. It is a horror to think neither may have value, hence we try. In my case, I try to push words and ideas past a hiatus of conventional wisdom. Objectors may not see how desperate and hopeless I feel. Though being non-textual, I cannot hide my immodest love of words. How exciting the word design demanded 3 different ways of spelling in my text. Is this an indication the subject may be diffuse? Then there is the special condition of using words to make sculpture, not poems, a sculptural experience out of and in words. Are ideas like fantasies, little white fairies, Tinkerbells, just there to get you into trouble? An eminent art historian contemptuously labeled me to my face one of the smart artists, even though he invited me there for that reason, I assume. At the same time, I am extremely honored and grateful having been asked here. I had always hoped to be able to have this kind of educational faculty. So, without a leg to stand on, let's begin either having done our best or knowing how foolhardy they are the same inside great humiliation. The use of the question is meant to contribute among contributions, while absolute in its aspirations. Hopefully, a strict subject will prevent the solipsistic. An open door? Why do I, an artist, like art and design too? When I pick up T magazine, why do I abandon all restraint? And when put down, feel impoverished, lacking interest, exhausted from its poor quality? Who speaks? Athena or Zeus? Both is singular. Athena, goddess of opposites, no way singular or multiple. Why is design in nature? Why is art against nature? How much is nature a human concept? Is the concept in the design? Is there any issue free of design? If that things grow up defines design, that art knocks down, why is art design? Is the variety of any real given thing defines design without making the thing real? The reason the designed thing, which comes close to stating the thing, why the thing is so welcome in itself, is design like letters and art like numbers. Is the singular plural in design? Is the design singular in plural? Is there no telling design from plural? Plural from singular in design? How does a singular lost arriving at the train terminus? Is Athena a true goddess because she is neither singular nor multiple? Is Athena, therefore, a true goddess of design? If Athena were to control design, would design be infinity? Could infinity come within grasp? Have a color? Could one know where this color came from? Could it challenge apprehension? Could it grow in place of apprehensions? Has Athena been arguing for different apprehensions for centuries anyway? Would her apprehension change design as we know it? Would Zeus know of it? As opposites, would design be their unity then? When someone says design, does one excite for this unity? Whether it be fashion, in cars, architecture, typography, computer programming. Is art, on the other hand, different? Recording, yes or no? Qualities of yes. Is design the power of unity? Simply the largest unity possible? Infinity? What happens when you choose design? Does one look for design as above? Is design consciousness? Raised consciousness? Can one talk about design? Can designers talk about design? Themselves as pure designers? Why do others have no respect or appreciation for the concept of design? Why do some judge it a negative, preferring the non-individualist sources for form? Why is it thought to be non-essential, luxurious? If one held it at the point where it enters the world from an undefined and indefinable origin as Anaximander, what would it look like before it has qualities? What defines, if not qualities? Can something be something with no qualities? Or exist in indefinability? Unless we care too greatly for the indefinable as a thing? Could one call this entire state design? Then, and in essence, can pushing the indefinable toward greater indefinability lead to a greater apprehension of design. Is this what our great designers did when their powers allowed? Christopher Dresser, for example, is it like a gift mathematicians have, often given with the strength of youth? Could everything be design? Even nature, a subsidiary? Is plastic surgery really a question respecting design, challenging nature? Is respecting not so much a question of how much, but of design? Why does it make me so happy to see I share the same designer with the bone of the pigs on my plate I have just eaten from? If this happiness comes from respect, should I trust these appreciations to grow? Should I see they grow endlessly? Anytime I want to be happy. Is that why I have a memory? You can tell who designed the memory. But why? What is the why of design? How do you feel when it is in a dish? Why are some dishes better designed than others? Are we surprised to see design in the world? What is the image of design? Can one photograph real design? Does the photograph reduce real design to fake? Do we live in a world of fake design? Does fake design coexist with real indiscernibly? What is fake design? Fake design, disrespectful to designers trying to design, morally corrupting, like when a designer tries to make art. Do we have to know the exact location of design so that art is free to imitate art and itself, art heritage, as well as design? How do they complement? How does true design emerge? Or is there no absolute, just better or worse? What kind of person wants to live with the best design? Better than yours? Does choosing make you a designer? Or are you already one, finding yourself. Do we admire those who enjoy learning about themselves too? Does art seem to direct toward the definable and design toward the indefinable? Do I seem able to have heroes among many designers who must be strong enough to face the infinite, indefinable? Can the artist and art lovers reach a beautiful conclusion on a never-ending, infinite journey? If one sees Athena as non-singular, non-dual, non-multiple, does she unify or create unsolvable problems? Is the opposite of infinity the infinity also? An open door? Thank you. Yeah.
So we're going to now open this up, and you're going to pray with us. So I hope you're all praying for me. First of all, thank you so much. You really have to participate, so you can't just leave this thing to me. But Richard, one of the things that is very unusual about tonight is that it's one of the very few nights that I can ever think when people have this kind of running slide, there is a tendency to get distracted. People look at the images and they forget about words. They just look at what's going on. With you, it seems it was the reverse for me. I almost saw nothing of your art. I mean, very little. And partly because of your concentration, partly because of the slowness, I was only looking at your mouth and your utterances. So it was actually, I was focused completely on what you were saying. Plus the fact that what you were saying wasn't so easy to decipher, because you are reading really something between a kind of narrative and a piece of poetry. And so it requires constant opening up of the material, because everything is about layering of layers. And so I'm busy trying to unlayer the layers of all the things. So it was wonderful. It's very enjoyable. I don't know how much of it I got and how much of it is just my sort of my own fiction. But I think it would be good to be specific with a few things just before we kind of open it up. One thing was that you said in the reading of the text. No, you're going to need that in 1 second now. I'm not going to go on forever. Very nice. Very good. We like the new take on a vest. Yes, very good.
This is a designer when he was young, and this is now 10 years different. This is my point where look at this.
You need to speak to the mic.
Oh yeah.
Also.
Okay.
While you're doing that, Now I've forgotten what I was going to say. No, but one of the things was at the beginning. You said I am writing design in 3 different ways, and so I think it would be good if you say what those 3 different ways are. But
Oh, there, I'm supposed to do that. Yeah, well, very, very simply, it was, design lowercase, and then design certain times needed a capital, and then other times it needed it needed to be italicized. And I mean, I tried to, keep it down to those 3, and I think, but I feel the, this, like the parameters. I mean, it's a diffuse subject, and actually that's one of the things I was, because I think just because the subject is diffuse by nature, if you agree, or you don't have to agree, but there's a good side and a bad side, and to not sneak out the side door and say, well, which I must say I certainly thought of, because it's easy just to say, oh, well, it's not a subject. You can't really do a talk. You have to have a subject for a talk. And that in trying to speak about design, and I know I'm if you're focused on a branch of design, you might not look at design historically and in terms of how the philosophers talk about it. But I found one. I guess I dislike. I'd be very happy to. I believe it's a subject. I believe that you can make a talk out of it, but it has to be allowed to be bigger, and engage in. I find in my artwork, I have to think about things like, well, why do you have a front and why do you have a back? Well, probably because there's a sun and there's a moon, and the sun is going, came and created our fronts for us, and the moon is for the back. One has to. I think especially at this moment where the contextual is so important, so even exaggerated, it's an excellent time to really, get it on, and get as, don't you, as far as context, and that there is an analogy between what a designer, the strength a designer uses to go right head on into the indefinable, and being fearless with contextual issues. Anyway, and I think that makes design bigger. It makes it more like what it is. Its true size.
I want to ask Craig to join us in a second, but can you explain this? I don't know if you got this emphasis that Richard is always making about the strength that the designer needs. And even before this talk, you were talking about the fact that you felt this was also something to do with the youth, the kind of strength that you needed to face design. And why do you think that is? What is the necessity of that strength? Why do designers need strength? And what's the difference between that and why don't artists need the same kind of strength that you are emphasizing in your talk and you did with us before upstairs?
Well, I do think that my idea is coming a little bit from intellectual work. I think we all we're all capable to some extent to physical work and intellectual work and creative work, and that the intellectual work is when, and I'm sure everybody knows much better than I do, but when you put in a real hard day's work of doing intellectual work, you feel so tired, and you also know that when if you're feeling well or at a certain time or where you're younger, just the application of that kind of strength, head out, straightforward, is more possible than when, I try to do my language studies in the morning, and I, I'm thrilled to do it, but I can't do, okay. So then you get the creative work, which in a way because like design, there's so much time as water's gone under the bridge, but there was a moment when a lot of the design community were happy about this notion that that a designer has to know everything about everything, but an artist doesn't have to know anything about anything. And that's a distinction. But in that going, so there's in design there is an application of intellect. That is And what I'm being bad about is suggesting that because intellect isn't necessarily 100% good, but in terms of design, and what great designers do when they're young is to take that intellect and turn it into force, an absolute straight power, full speed ahead, and they both get good design, and they avoid the bad side of intellect, and they're creative. That's a pretty good deal, I think.
Well, we'll have to ask people whether they agree with this specific depiction. I do know that when we have people who start teaching for the first time, especially when people have just graduated and they might be in career discovery or something like that, teaching, that they always say this thing, that they never realized how physically exhausting teaching is, because the kind of intellectual concentration that it requires. People think it's a mental activity and you're very relaxed, but actually at the end of the day you feel completely physically exhausted. So I think there's some truth to that, but I think it would be interesting to discuss the connections then between this forceful activity of design, and because we haven't really talked about your art that's been also up there. So on the one hand, there's been Richard Tuttle, in a way, talking about design. On the other hand, we have on the screen Richard Tuttle, the artist. And so we now also need to negotiate that space between your art and your articulations of the design position, and so we need to find a way of reconciling that. But maybe some of you will come in with questions. I want to ask Craig to maybe talk a little bit about your own sort of encounter with Richard's work as a kind of segue of touching also on the art. Those of you who don't know, Craig has been very important and influential figure, really, in terms of focusing on the space between urban design, architecture, and art in all his work, especially the kind of creation of the design district in Miami, which has been his sort of brainchild. And so you've worked with a lot of artists, but I know you also have a long-standing friendship with Richard. So maybe you can help us link to the images in some way.
Well, first, Mohsen, I want to thank you, because as I was sitting there, I was thinking, well, had I gone to Harvard or been able to teach at Harvard, I would understand what Richard was saying. And so I was relieved to know that you struggled a little bit as well. So one of my early encounters with Richard's incredible mind and approach to things is we did a beautiful project in Miami, a residential project called Aqua. And there was a whole team of people that were working on public art. It was John Baldessari, a great art dealer who's a friend of ours, Jack Tilton, a cousin of mine, David Ross, who at the time was the director of SF MoMA. And we all convened so that Richard could come and do a presentation for a major public art project, the largest one that we had ever done to date. It was a massive wall at Aqua. And so Richard came and he appeared before all of us and he said, yesterday I was walking on the beach and I found this shell. And it has red, it has yellow, it also has some black. And he then said, so that's going to be my project. We're going to have an object that goes and crashes into the pool and splashes up on the wall, and the colors are going to be these colors, and it's also going to, it had little gold, so there were 4 colors and the rest was white. And it was amazing because it was that little subtle experience. He was walking on the beach, connected with nature. He was thinking about what he was going to do. He hadn't prepared. He combined like a random experience and then synthesized it into art. And so, Richard, I'm not sure, but as you were giving your talk, what opened up to me, especially once Mohsen started speaking about it, was in a way your talk seemed to me like your art. Each line sort of made a statement. It created a boundary. You explored that boundary, and you also made it go away.
Well, I can't expect everyone to know who Craig is, but he's I think a little. It might be a touch exaggerated, but he's the guy who developed South Beach in Miami, and like he was like 16 when he did it, like that, I mean, I was always the kid, who would hold their hand up in first day of school and say, could we do this, could we, and like, I so admire people who get up and do stuff, I mean, and so, Craig is totally, hero, but it's like a, it's the positive energy, and I find, I mean, positive attracts negative, negative attracts positive. But there's a lot of negativity in the art world, and it's in powerful places, and it's in the universities, and it's I don't get too upset by it because I know that in the end the positive is going to win by just a little bit, or we wouldn't be here. But still, it's pretty annoying to be around that much negativity. But Craig is. I mean, why he does everything he does, is on this very pure channel of positive energy, and he doesn't look back, and he doesn't expect credit or anything like that. But I think he's. I mean, I'm delighted that he's connected with the school, and because it's brings, I could list 10 categories so that he's bringing his involvement here with snap of the fingers. So anyway, I just that you all know, there's somebody out there in the world, who who actually loves design, but in all aspects, we can talk about, objects and so on, but the, abstract world as well as the concrete. The abstract world has to be designed just as much as the concrete, and so Craig has got it all, in my opinion.
Richard, thank you so much.
You're
That was
welcome.
very
Yeah.
kind, and it really helped us all understand your art.
Yeah. This, yeah. Well, he that's pretty good because he lives with it.
What's
But-
going on?
But Craig, when you understand it, you should take it down because it's no more, it's lost its reason for being there, and it's supposed to be something even different every single day, or it's not what art's supposed to be, I mean,
One of the things that's interesting is that I when I look at the work, I think designers have the capacity to instrumentalize is maybe a bit too strong a word, but to actually create or construct some sort of a purposive framework for things. So, for example, in your work, one of the things that's very exciting for not artists, for designers, is precisely the way in which in your art, you're dealing with the juxtaposition of different materials, the coloration of different things, the placing of things next to each other. And while these things might not be architecture, they are very relevant in terms of how one really constructs a certain set of material juxtapositions that are unexpected. So we're not going to make buildings necessarily always out of cloth or fabric or chains, but people do that, and they are using unexpected materials to come together in some form of relationship. And I think that's something that is very strong in your work because it's very attentive to the detail of things. The work doesn't look super finished, or it's not about the way that it's made, but it's very much about the way that it's put together, and that resonates very strongly with designers, I think. And it's very interesting that this is not you now talking about design, but this is you really talking about art. When Richard was upstairs, he was mentioning the fact that maybe I don't know how this came about, but that we were thinking, or we were sort of constructing the idea of design as something that you said was like within an 8-inch frame or box or something, and your sense of design was more like a 12-inch frame or box. I thought that was a very interesting thing. Like we hadn't really genuinely, we hadn't tried to force him into an 8-inch box or frame, but the fact that you perceived of the idea of something that might be limiting, and that you were really trying to kind of cover that extra 4 inches between the 8 and the 12 to kind of expand the horizon of design by actually reading it so poetically, by pausing, by letting reflection kind of come in. I thought that was a wonderful thing and very, very inspiring. But maybe you will have some very sophisticated, very tough questions to ask about the ontology of design and its relationship to contemporary art practice that you can ask Richard. Do you have any questions from the audience? Otherwise, Craig and I will continue. Please, one hand there, one hand there. Maybe we can get a couple of questions, please, and then we will see what Richard and Craig have to say.
Is this on? Oh,
yes.
First of all, thank you very much for giving that talk. It was great. I noticed, well, for us as architects, we don't just make things, we don't just make monolithic objects, we form the space in between as well. And I noticed with your speech, I found myself living in the spaces rather than in the words. And so I wonder what this sort of positive, negative, like figure ground, solid void it seems to be very present in your art, but you didn't really touch on that so much, and I wonder what that means to you.
Can we hold that and then get another question? There was also a hand back there.
Hi. I'm always super moved when I see your work in person. It's hard to explain what it's like. And like you're saying, there's no words for it, but there's something almost like jumping to an elsewhere, like a little portal, like the way you cut the shape, put the shape on the wall, and the viewer's experience with that shape kind of reaches you to an elsewhere. The only analogy I have is like when you jump into like A.E. Cummings' taxonomy of language, it makes language something else. The shape becomes like a carrier of something that's untranslatable, and it's always been really moving to see your work. I was just wondering if you have any anecdotes about re-seeing your work as it gets restaged in all the shows you have, for new information or new experiences that you might get once it's rehung.
Very good question.
You want? Yeah, I think there are two kind of different things. That would be nice too.
I think one thing that it's entirely fair, and I'm excited because I think this is where now that we've the complementariness of art and design at this interstices of human history, where in this recent past we've experienced a ground in shifting, and so it might have started at something you call a psychological ground, and then it shifted to something you could call an actual ground, like that, and then it actually shifted to a ground we call love. That's what I tried to read to in the audience today, and then. The most recent shift in that ground is language, and I think a lot of people find communication difficult at the moment, and I think one of the reasons for that is you have to be on the same ground as the person you're talking to. If they're on the psychological ground and you're on the real ground, it's like and so, I think that's also with in art. That's this issue that art can say yes or no, or describe yes, but design has to, just like a conversation, you have to know which ground you're sitting on. And it is a historical progress, and I find one of the main transitions of the moment is going from a world which was built on a separation between the mechanical and the human to a world that can engage a unity that's more powerful than the mechanical and the human. I mean, it's no point in. A lot of people feel there wouldn't have been the genocides in the 20th century, if there was a unity between the human and the mechanical. But and so it's normal to think, well, we can just go back somehow or to revisit that unity or something. My position is that we have to find a higher unity, and that's this. What I've noticed that the individual's selfhood and their language are a unity. A powerful unity that already exists. You just have to recognize it. And that, in a sense, begins a new ground, and a ground which designers, I really, maybe that's the reason I came here, because I want so much to live in a world. I love design, You imagine walking down the street and just being surrounded by design that is built on the ground of the unity between the individual self and their language. And so that I love this notion of but I'm just going to take that and generalize it that there is shape is a tremendously important part of the post-tribal cultural experiment of America. And in that sense, it's entirely correct for that same shape to have morphology, have completely, you recognize it, and in a way, it's something you can't give to the viewer, and I wish one could. Also, there's I think something very much important going on in art at the moment is we want art to come from the demos. We don't want art to come from the individual, but nobody's figured out how to make that happen. But and so if like I have seen just what you said, where same piece in another exhibition and times, I mean, it's unaccountable, but it just, my gosh, that line is so highlighted in like a socio-contextual way, It's just because it's been out there in the world, and like, oh my gosh, if we could just capture that energy, it'd be so great. But so that's and yeah, I find well, it's back to the positive energy thing. Like if that's, I think our job is to send as much positive energy out. But my only claim is that the real positive energy, the real great source of positive energy at the moment is the unity between the individual and their language. Does that make sense? Oh yeah, okay.
I mean, kind of partly related to that question about the idea of redoing things, like rehanging or in many instances reinstalling, is the degree to which your work also relies on the idea of installation, because it has this kind of three-dimensional thing where I imagine that sometimes when you remove the thing from the gallery and you've got that piece of work now, it's in this state of transition, it's different than when it's actually in the gallery and it's been located, it's been installed because of its three-dimensionality. And I think that's a kind of interesting state of affairs, because if I remember correctly, you were talking at some point, you said design in nature and art against nature. And the idea that design in nature is partly some of the material is also kind of recollections of those natural elements that stand in a way for the world. But I'm curious, just in response to that question, the degree to which in your work there is that interrelationship going on between the thing and its installation, which makes the design of the thing an artistic activity. That there seems to be a lot of that going on, where you are situating the work, you have the eye of the designer, you have the materials, but actually the process in its fullness then also becomes, in a way, a kind of art project that
when it's outside of the gallery, it's something else. It's those props. They're kind of props for making art in some way. But that seems like, I don't know whether that resonates with you or it's complete nonsense.
No, it's this part where, the room that has an artwork in it is a different room than the room without an artwork in it, and partly. I mean, we mentioned a little bit before that the art, is in all the arts is in relation to this human suffering, grief, and that we even small children, you experience grief, and that's. Human beings have figured out how, in certain set orders, like words, putting words in a certain pattern in a certain way, you can start with most horrendous grief, and by the end of 2 short lines, it's gone. So I think going back to the room with art in it. The room with art in it means it's a room potentially without grief, and a room without art in it is grief is, and it's, but the actually I think here was one of my heroes. She's in the philosophy department with
Annie Cavell?
Stanley chose her as his replacement, and she wrote a book called The Body and Pain.
Elaine Scarry.
Yeah, sorry for that. But we were actually on a
she's
panel.
She's actually in the English department. So.
English, but I think Craig and she was on that panel with us at the Drawing Center. I think that was anyway. She has this marvelous idea that when you see flowers in a room, you know that there's imagination in that room, which is absolutely true. And I mean but anyway, the issue of the imagination, we didn't even touch on that and that's why, for example, art is against nature because nature has imagination in it, and we have our relation to, like the flowers, if you have flowers in the room, you might, but that doesn't deal with, okay, you're all smarter than I am. So.
One thing that occurred to me, Richard, on the question of installation is, it's so much part of your work sometime, and sometimes you leave so much freedom. Like with the cloth pieces, there's no top or bottom. You can take these shapes and you can hang them however you want. And so the installation becomes part of actually determining the ultimate art in a way. And then there's other pieces where you'll instruct a line to be drawn down the wall, and then at a certain height, there'll be the actual art piece. And so it's actually something that you seem to investigate and play with and constrain and then leave freedom for, depending on what you're doing at a specific moment.
Well, I take this approach where that art, which can be a mirror to the world, and that's important, and people maybe need that tremendously or something. But on the other hand, the art can be fill the gap between the world we have and a perfect world, and one of the things we might need in that gap is freedom. So how and in what ways can they? I mean, most people don't want freedom. They'd rather be told what to do or something. But I find this. I'm going on and on about Athena, and this idea of a goddess, who served because she could represent opposites. She could be simultaneously the goddess of peace and the goddess of war, simultaneously.
That sounds like my wife, Jackie.
And this is. I mean, there's a I sort of understand now that my father was really mentally ill, and so I had to create a world that was not insane. And one of the ways I think I did that, and even in this talk, is that that something which is like Athena, where just to drag out that image, that is true in terms of war, and it's also true in terms of peace. That's got to be a sane world. So and that's I mean, when you look at who is like a great design, and I don't like to be. I mean, I do like to be involved with quality, and so. But you can look at a great design, and it runs true. It's not. I mean, it becomes like a beacon of sanity. I mean, and everything you collect in terms of design. I go to Craig's house, and I just see walk from piece to piece, and each one is a beacon of sanity. And I saying a lot of things in public. That
Now I have to invite you all over to the house.
Yeah. And jump at the chance.
Any other thoughts? And then maybe afterwards also here. Do you change your mind or? You're okay? There is here. So. You were go, please. Anita.
Richard, you began by saying that there was a kind of division of labor between physical labor, intellectual, and creative being at the top, which was great to see. Can you speak more to that and how you see creativity as the highest of the three and the relationship between them?
Yes. So. The mic is behind you. Oh, it is? The other side, yeah. Can you pass it on, then we'll give it back to you too.
Thanks. Hi. I guess over the years I've seen your drawings a lot, and they always seem to sort of have, or they start happening at kind of a minimum threshold of existence, which is to say, it's like your fabric it's just cut out. The cutting out is not very thought out. The wood, it's not milled or cut further. The paper, it's sometimes just pulled right out of the sketchbook. And I guess I'm wondering what you are actually thinking about or feeling when you're making things. And also to something that you were saying earlier about, which I didn't think of until this evening, a lot of your work, more so your sculpture, really does seem to rely upon a gallery space to exist. I mean, the frame drawings could exist anywhere, but I can't imagine a sculpture in a house, for instance. And so I'm wondering how knowledge of producing for a gallery space informs the sculptural work. And then just, more generally, your thoughts on a relationship and what happens when you're making works.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk. I was thinking about, there's an interview with Charles Bernstein where you said this something I've been thinking about for several years, that in art it's possible to be free of beauty. And I was wondering how you find that place, and also when you are in that place, what you follow or what that feels like.
Very good questions.
Yeah.
Another 45 minutes.
Another 45 minutes, yeah. Well, I just want to say here that there are these pyramid of energies, and that the most common is the physical, and then the less common is the intellectual. But the amazing thing about the creative energy, and this is, I wish there were art schools who could teach this. It's because it's the hardest work. It's the most exhausting, the work that consumes the most calories. But it seems like nothing. There's no registration. Like even like the intellectual work, you feel like you strain in the front of the head, and that's like to trust yourself when you're doing creative work. That you could work for 6 months and have nothing to show for it, and it would be like so great, so important, and for doing creative work, and it's just, and I think it's also a part of where you, like it's outside a, where, tit for tat, or you do this and that does that, or something that, there's just no, and so a lot of, I'm quoting a very good friend, but they say that a lot of artists die of remorse. And if you, look at the record, and you just say, what's going on here, and the remorse is a super form of guilt, because they don't feel they're worthy of the work they've created. And so, like if you build a respect for your creative work to the degree that you don't expect any kind of physical cognizing part, you're not going to die of remorse. It's a tough field, but it's a good, and like there's so many, so much you can spend 5 lifetimes, but there's things where artists can help each other. I make a distinction where, in art schools they teach you how to they teach you to be an artist, but they don't teach you what it's like to be an artist. And you need to know more what it's like to be an artist than have to know what it is to be an artist. It's anyway. Okay, no, okay, okay. And then this, I like that. In the first place. And I'm not happy about this, but a lot of my work is concerned with a pointless point. And I actually think of it as a kind of a primordial language, or it has the, and so that pointless point exists, well, let's see. Yeah, okay. That's not, what I find, also, let's throw this one out. There's a distinction between inspiration on the one hand and idea on the other. And it can be extremely hard to know the difference between, but the the inspiration always holds that pointless point, and the idea never holds that pointless point. So one of my things that's very important to me is the what I call raising the respect for art and artists, and that value can be in the art per se, and it's even like to force the world, or force the marketplace to look at that little torn out piece of paper and say, and give it a high value. Because it's not just for, it's for a number of reasons, but I so much want to live in a world where, one, the artist is recognized as a natural occurrence, like a cloud going by, something like that, and then two, that two would be to knowing how great it is to understand the nature of the artist, because every artist is like they come in every size, shape, and form, and then three is to have a value where that can be accumulated in a way that someday we'll get our Parthenon, and and then that wonderful the beauty, that's a great Charles Bernstein. This is one of America's great poets, I would say, but he has like about zero interest in the spiritual dimension, which is fine, because he's so super talented. It doesn't matter. But the beauty is. We have a place up in Mount Desert in Maine, and spend the summer there, and about 25 times a day, you are just dropped by the beauty that you experience, and in fact, it's not even enough. You go back for more and more and more and more. Okay, okay, so. In that level, I describe myself as somebody who is really hungry, huge appetite for beauty. But in Maine, there remains an edge between art and see. This is yeah. Okay. I think I'll get it. Like when this talk, I spoke about art being against nature, and I know that was very strong, but I'm in the. And I said this to the kids we were there, that every time the artist makes a step to to achieve art, they have to be trying to destroy art. Because, you know, if it's all that you think it is, or want it to be, if you can't destroy it, that anything is left there. So you get this message. It's a door that swings both ways. So like I am trying to make the most. Well, I'm going to use the word beautiful in that sense. You know, beautiful thing, creating the beauty, because beauty that we respond to is already there. You know, creating beauty is another category. So I would, you know, and this is part of why this creative work, and I know that should be expected in design work as well, and not to be afraid of that, because the very work has a built-in ambiguity. You know. And I might go so far as to say that in a project, any given project, to try to destroy the design simultaneously as to achieve a design, you know, would be something equivalent. And but also in Maine, this issue between nature and art, where it's really hard to do my work in Maine. But again, and I am a masochist, but I'm not that much of a masochist, and so I'll try to, and I might make just a few things, but they tend to be better quality level. And so, I mean, this is also what I'm saying about artists being a natural thing, and that if you know artists, you can study them. Like, I mean, the Museum of Fine Arts did a Rembrandt show a couple years ago, and like a beautiful catalog, and you have his entire life out in prints. And if you're a sensitive viewer, you can see exactly where he was at in his trajectory, you know, printmaking trajectory. And if I were, you know, a collector, I know exactly the years of Rembrandt prints I would want, you know, and not the others. So this, you know, erase the image of, you know, somebody going to New York and trying to be, you know, a success and, you know, a star and all that. It's like you know, my father was completely against this, and it wasn't until because I was talented and I, you know, formed the usual picture and all that, and I said, like, you know, I'm not doing this because I'm good at it, you know, like I'm doing what I think I am worst at, you know. And then he gave me permission, you know, like that. No, so, I mean, like I don't, I mean, all those works up there, this didn't come easy, you know. I mean, it's like the hardest thing. It's like pulling, you know, I'd give you my right arm before doing most of that stuff, you know. So, I mean, beauty is, I think we, yeah, I think and next time I see Charles, I'm going to ask him about, you know, making, what it means to make something beautiful, you know, and I know he'll have something amazing to say on that. But thank you for that. That was great. Yeah.
Next time I see a cloud blowing by, I'm going to say, "There goes Richard Tuttle."
Right. No, it's it's. I mean, like I'm who's this positivist? This Kant. Has anybody ever read this French philosopher? This 19th century Auguste Comte. Mm-hmm. Have you read it?
Rationalist, yeah.
Irrationalist, but also a positivist, and he's very much denigrated at the moment because Karl Marx really loved his work, and for the right reasons. And but we don't like communism, so we don't like Comte. But he's it's a that. One of his ideas, most important ideas, is that human beings are in a developmental wave of the developmental, and that we are, it is possible for us to evolve, and indeed we are evolving, and we are getting, better, in every way, moral, intellectual, creative, every kind of way, it's a lot of people pick up the morning paper and think that's not the case, but I do think it's the case, and I want to be participate in, because the great thing about because the art is the inspiration, but you have to be an appropriate vehicle. You could get the inspiration, and because you're kind of screwed up or your values are out of joint, or you only get like 20% of what you could have got. And that's yeah.
This question of beauty that you mentioned, which is something that also, it's something that Elaine Scarry has dealt with, is something that I think is discussed in the context of design school or in architecture or landscape a lot, because on one level there is the relationship to the work, the recognition of the beauty of things, but there is also, in the past, at least, sometimes a lot of reference to the ideality of things. Mm-hmm. And so I was really intrigued. A few years ago, I was part of making a book which was called Approximations. And the whole idea of approximations was about approximating some condition of ideality and not literally seeking the ideal. But I hadn't really thought about it until you talked tonight about the way in which living with art, or art, became in a way part of the fulfillment of some condition of ideality that was never to be fulfilled, that was missing in a way that one also didn't want it to be attained, but it was living through art that one somehow emotionally, psychologically coped with that loss, with that trauma, or however you put it. You mentioned another word that I can't remember. Grief, yeah, the grief. And I thought that was a very beautiful way of putting, describing things, because actually the work of an artist, or hopefully the work of a designer in some way, is part of that project of reconciling some relationship with the world that produces some level of fulfillment, and it's actually in the denial of the ideality of the thing that perhaps also that beauty is achieved, not by literally trying to kind of do things. So thank you very much for being with us tonight, for really all your thoughts, for sharing the work, and hopefully we'll get a chance to hear more and see more. It was wonderful for a group of students who actually got to spend a little bit of time with Richard at the Harvard Art Museum this afternoon.
I just have to throw in that, because that ideal issue is, I find, can be problematic. But we have lived, through a breakdown of the ideal, and it's led us to be very suspicious of the ideal, and rightly so. But I have actually found it to great profit to go before Hegel and to look at the formation of the ideal as a unity, you know, for the early Romantic period. And I feel it's very valuable to bring forward that. And you know, maybe that's in fact the ideality that you're speaking of. I hope so. But the one that to me that's I'm not so interested in the ideal as much as the unity, and that's where I find the unity I need in order to see the unity between the person and their language. You know, it's the same unity, and I find that enormously powerful and valuable, and so just couldn't let that slip by. Sorry.